The Hall of Eternal Glory had witnessed many pivotal moments in Trinity history, but none quite like this. Supreme War Master Thalvek stood before the assembled High Council, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the light of 3 suns streaming through the crystalline dome. Behind him, the holographic projectors hummed with barely contained energy, ready to broadcast this moment across 100 star systems and beyond. Today, Thalvek began, his voice carrying the weight of 15 generations of warriors. The Trinity Dominion draws a line across the stars. Today, we declare that humanity's expansion ends here. The council members rose as one, their traditional robes rustling in synchronized approval. They had debated this decision for 3 full cycles, examining every angle, every consequence. The humans had pushed too far, established colonies in disputed territories, and ignored 17 separate diplomatic warnings. The Trinity, who had maintained galactic order for 4,000 years, could not let such insolence stand. The declaration itself was a masterwork of diplomatic aggression, crafted by the finest scholars in the Dominion. It cited 37 violations of established territorial law, referenced ancient treaties that predated human spaceflight by millennia, and invoked the names of Trinity ancestors who had died defending these very principles. The document ran to 400 pages in the original Trinity, with translations prepared in every major galactic language. As Thalvek read the declaration, his words were simultaneously broadcast across every known communication channel. FTL relay stations carried his voice to the furthest reaches of civilized space. The Trinity had spared no expense. This would be heard by every sentient species. In the local galactic arm, let it be known, Thalvek concluded, raising his blade arm in the traditional gesture of war, that the Trinity Dominion will no longer tolerate human expansion into territories held sacred by our ancestors. We demand immediate withdrawal from all disputed systems. We demand reparations. We demand recognition of Trinity's sovereignty. Failure to comply will result in the full military might of the Dominion being brought to bear against human holdings. The broadcast ended. Silence filled the Hall of Eternal Glory. Thalvek felt a surge of satisfaction. The message was clear, unambiguous, and terrifying. Within hours, human leadership would be scrambling to respond. Delegations would be dispatched. Surrender terms would be negotiated. This was how these things always went. The Trinity had fought 12 wars in their long history. They had won 12 wars. The response, or lack thereof, 3 days later. Thalvek sat in his command chamber, reviewing sensor data of human military movements. He expected panic, fleet redeployments, emergency sessions of human government. Instead, the reports showed nothing unusual. Human shipping continued on normal routes. Their military forces maintained standard patrol patterns. It was as if nothing had happened. Perhaps they require more time to organize their response, suggested strategic analyst Murkith. Though her voice carried uncertainty, then the message arrived. Thalvek opened it with eager anticipation, expecting frantic pleas for negotiation, perhaps an offer of partial withdrawal. What he found instead made his primary and secondary hearts skip beats in unison. Human Colonial Administration Automated Response System, thank you for your message. Your communication has been received and logged in our system. Reference number 84739. Category: Interstellar Relations. Formal complaint priority level. Standard assigned department. External Affairs, Division 7. Subsection Current Queue Position 1. 247 estimated response time. 6 to 8 weeks if this is an urgent matter requiring immediate attention. Please contact your local human representative directly. For colony permit inquiries, press 1. For trade disputes, press 2. For territorial concerns, press 3. For all other matters, please hold and a representative will assist you during normal business hours Monday-Friday. 08001700 Earth Standard Time closing parenthesis. We appreciate your patience. Thalvek read it 3 times. Then a 4th. His translator must be malfunctioning. This couldn't be the official response to a declaration of war from a galactic power. This was a customer service message. They filed it, he said slowly, his voice hollow with disbelief. They filed our declaration of war like it was a complaint about a delayed shipment. Murkoff examined the message herself, running it through multiple linguistic analysis protocols. The translation is accurate, Supreme War Master. This appears to be an automated response from a bureaucratic processing system. They didn't even read it. Thalvek's voice rose. 400 pages of carefully crafted diplomatic protocol, and they didn't even read it? It appears not, sir. Thalvek slumped in his command chair, an undignified posture he would normally never permit himself. This was unprecedented. In 4,000 years of Krinithi military history, no opponent had ever responded to a declaration of war with an automated message and a queue number. Perhaps this is a negotiating tactic, Murkoff suggested. They wished to appear unconcerned to gain psychological advantage. Thalvek wanted to believe that. The alternative that the humans genuinely didn't care was too disturbing to contemplate. Human perspective. Colony Administrator Maya Rodriguez was having a terrible day. And it was only 10 a.m. The main water reclamation system on Kepler-4 had failed overnight, flooding 3 agricultural domes and shorting out the backup power grid in Section 7. The terraform processors were running at 60% capacity because someone had ordered the wrong filter membranes again, and now her assistant was telling her about some message from aliens, who were apparently upset about something. Can it wait? Maya asked, not looking up from the engineering reports on her tablet. The water situation was critical. They had maybe 48 hours before the colony's reserve tanks ran dry. It marked as a formal diplomatic communication. Her assistant, James, said something about territorial disputes and forwarded to the Colonial Administration Office on Earth. That's their department. Already did. They auto-responded with a ticket number. Perfect. What else? James hesitated. The message mentioned war, actually. Formal declaration. Maya finally looked up. War? With who? The Krinithi Dominion? I had to look them up. Apparently they control about 200 star systems in the Sagittarius arm. Maya pulled up a star map on her screen, located Krinithi space, and frowned. That's nowhere near here. Why would they care about Kepler-4 to be? The disputed territories they mentioned are actually 3 systems over from us. The Epsilon colonies. Oh. Maya filed that information away and returned to her engineering reports. So not our problem. But shouldn't we be concerned? I mean, it's a war declaration. Maya looked at James with the patience of someone who had spent 5 years managing a frontier colony through every crisis imaginable. James, last month we dealt with a silicate-based life form that tried to eat our mining equipment. Before that, we had the fungal contamination in the hydroponics bay that nearly wiped out our entire food supply. And let's not forget the solar flare that knocked out our communications for 3 weeks. A diplomatic dispute 3 systems away. That's somebody else's problem. If you say so, boss. I do. Now, about these water pumps. The conversation lasted another 30 seconds before Maya completely forgot about the war declaration. She had more immediate concerns. The colony needed water. The terraform schedule was already 6 months behind, and she had a meeting with the mining consortium in 2 hours to discuss expanding their operations. War with some distant alien empire? That was Earth's problem. They had people for that. People who worked in offices and sent automated responses. People whose job it was to worry about such things. Maya's job was keeping 15,000 colonists alive on a planet that was still technically hostile to human life. Everything else was just noise. The Trinity confusion grossed weeks after the declaration. Thalvek convened an emergency meeting of his intelligence staff. The situation had gone from confusing to deeply troubling. Show me the human military response, he commanded. Senior intelligence officer. Craven activated a holographic display showing human-controlled space. Color-coded indicators showed fleet positions, supply movements, and comm traffic intensity. Thalvik studied it carefully, looking for the telltale signs of war preparation. He found nothing. There's been no significant change in their force deployment, Craven reported. A few additional patrol ships in the disputed sectors, but that appears to be routine cycling. No recall of merchant vessels. No civilian evacuation orders. No emergency military production. What about their communications? Thalvek asked. Surely their leaders are discussing the situation? Craven looked uncomfortable. We've been monitoring their news broadcasts, as you ordered. The war declaration was mentioned once on a program called Galactic News Today, and they spent 18 seconds on it. Between a story about a new restaurant opening on Mars and a feature about competitive zero-gravity sports, Thalvek felt his neck ridges flush with frustration. 18 seconds. The exact quote from their news presenter was, "The Trinity Dominion has declared war on humanity over territorial disputes. Human officials say they're looking into it." In other news, Championship Grav Ball finals this weekend promise to be exciting. The room fell silent. Thalvek could hear the hum of the ship's drives, the soft breathing of his staff, the sound of his own heart's beating too quickly. "They think we're not serious," he said finally. "They think this is some kind of diplomatic theater. Perhaps, Supreme War Master," Murkith ventured, "we should proceed with the military demonstration. Once they see our fleet, once we engage their forces, they will understand this is real." Thalvek nodded slowly. The fleet was ready. 500 warships, the greatest armada the Trinity had assembled in a century. They would jump to the border systems, engage human forces, capture a colony or two. A small war, really just enough to make the point. The humans would sue for peace, accept Trinity terms, and order would be restored. Give the order. Thalvek said. All ships to jump stations. We launch in 3 days. As his staff hurried to comply, Thalvik studied the star maps again. Human space sprawled across the charts, less organized than Trinity territory, but vast nonetheless. How many systems did they control? The intelligence estimates varied. At least 500, possibly more. And yet they treated a declaration of war like background noise. A small voice in the back of Thalvek's mind whispered that something was wrong. Something fundamental about his understanding of humanity was incorrect. But he pushed the thought aside. The Trinity had fought 12 wars. They had won 12 wars. This would be 13. Fleet deployment. Trinity Warfleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. A display of military precision that had taken decades to perfect. 500 ships ranged in three-dimensional battle groups, each one a testimony to Trinity engineering and martial tradition. Thalvik stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Their target was the Epsilon 7 system, a minor human colony with a population of approximately 30,000. Intelligence suggested minimal military presence, perhaps 2 or 3 patrol ships, a handful of defensive platforms, an easy first conquest. A clear message: all ships report ready. Supreme War Master, his tactical officer, announced. Begin the approach. Standard conquest protocol. Hail the colony and demand surrender. The fleet moved forward, engines burning bright against the darkness of space. Thalvik felt the familiar thrill of battle approaching. This was what Trinity lived for, the test of strength, the glory of victory. Then his communications officer spoke, her voice confused. Supreme War Master, we're receiving a message from the colony. Already? We haven't even entered weapons range. Yes, sir. It appears to be automated. Thalvik felt a cold sensation in his stomachs. On screen, the message appeared, text only, no video. Simple, direct, and utterly baffling. Epsilon 7 colony automated traffic control warning. Your fleet trajectory will bring you within 50,000 kilometers of active mining operations in sectors 7 to 12. Please adjust course to maintain safe distance per colonial navigation regulation. 447b. Failure to comply may result in collision, hazards and liability for damages. Thank you for your cooperation. Have a nice day. Thalvik stared at the message. They were being given traffic directions by an automated system. While launching a military invasion, Supreme War Master, his tactical officer prompted. Should we respond? Ignore it, Thalvik said, his voice tight. Continue approach. Where are their defensive forces? Sensors swept the system, searching for military vessels. They found the mining operations. Mentioned in the message, huge automated platforms processing asteroids. They found civilian traffic, cargo ships moving between the colony and processing stations. They found the colony itself, a sprawling complex on the fourth planet's surface. What they didn't find, initially, was any military presence at all. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, detecting 3 contacts near the colony. Analyzing. They appear to be patrol vessels, standard colonial security class. Minimal armament, 3 ships. 3 small ships to defend against 500 Krinithi warships. This was almost insulting. "Hail them," Thalvek ordered. "Give them a chance to surrender before we destroy them." The communications channel opened. Thalvek prepared to deliver his ultimatum, the words he had practiced. "Yeah, hi. This is Epsilon 7 Security. You're those Krinithi folks, right? From the war declaration thing." The voice was casual, almost friendly, like someone answering a phone call from a neighbor. Thalvik stumbled over his prepared speech. Yes, I am Supreme War Master Thalvek of the Krinithi Dominion. Your colony is surrounded. Surrender immediately or face. Okay, yeah. So here's the thing. The human interrupted. "We did get that message, and honestly, we were going to file a response. But then the admin system went down for maintenance, and we've been dealing with a water main break in Sector 4, and it's just been a whole thing, you know?" Thalvik felt his translator struggling to process the casual tone, the complete lack of fear or even concern. "You understand you're facing imminent military action." He tried again. Right, about that. "Look, we're pretty busy down here. Is there any chance we could schedule this for next month? Things should be calmed down by then, and we could probably get someone from Colonial Defense to come out and handle the paperwork properly." "Paperwork?" Thalvek's voice rose. "This is war. This is conquest. Sure, I get that. It's just, could you maybe attack a different colony first? We're really behind schedule on our terraform operations, and this is going to completely mess up our quotas." The bridge of Eternal Dominion had gone completely silent. Every Krinithi officer stared at the communication console in disbelief. "We are not rescheduling an invasion," Thalvek roared. "You will surrender now or be destroyed." There was a pause. Then, "Okay, well, I tried. Hang on, let me transfer you to my supervisor." The channel went silent for a moment. Then new voice came on, older, tired. "This is Colony Administrator Yuki Tanaka. I understand you're here to invade us?" Finally, Thalvek breathed. "Yes, surrender your colony immediately." "Can't do that, I'm afraid. We've got contracts to fulfill, quotas to meet. Surrendering would put us in breach. You understand? I understand that you're about to be conquered, right? But have you filed the proper invasion permits? There's a process for this sort of thing. Permits?" Thalvek felt something snap inside him. All ships open fire. The Krinithi fleet opened fire on the 3 small patrol ships. Energy weapons lanced through space. The humans finally began to take evasive action. And then things got strange. The 3 patrol ships moved like nothing Thalvek had ever seen. They dodged, weaved, split formation, and reformed, all while laying down covering fire that was far too accurate for ships of their size. One Krinithi cruiser took hits to its forward shields and had to fall back. How are they doing that? His tactical officer demanded. Those are patrol ships. They shouldn't be able to outmaneuver our interceptors. But they were. For 15 minutes, 3 small human ships held off the leading elements of a 500-ship invasion fleet. They didn't win, they couldn't win, but they made the Trinity pay for every meter of space. Finally, inevitably, the first human ship's shields failed. It took a direct hit and went dark, drifting. The second ship lasted another 5 minutes before suffering the same fate. The third ship kept fighting. Alone, outgunned, clearly damaged, it kept moving, kept shooting, kept making the Trinity fleet work for their victory. Just die already. Thalvek found himself shouting at the screen. The human pilot's voice came over the comm one last time. Hey, Trinity guys, you're doing great. Really scary, but I'm going to need you to do me a favor. What? Thalvek couldn't help asking. Tell whoever's in charge of your invasion fleet that they really should have filed those permits. This is going to create so much paperwork. Then the third ship took a catastrophic hit and went silent. Thalvik stared at the tactical display. 3 patrol ships. They destroyed 3 patrol ships. And it had taken 15 minutes, and the concentrated fire of his entire vanguard. Supreme War Master, his censor officer said quietly, "The colony is hailing us again." What now? Administrator Tanaka's voice returned. Okay, so you've destroyed our security ships. Congratulations, I guess. That's going to be expensive to replace. Are you happy now? Prepare to be boarded. Thalvek ordered. Your colony is now property of the Trinity Dominion. UH. Well, before you do that, I need you to sign some liability forms. Those ships you destroyed, that's colony property. We're going to need compensation. Compensation? Also, the debris from the battle is currently on a collision course with our mining platforms in Sector 9. If those get damaged, that's another liability issue. So if you could maybe clean that up before you start the whole occupation thing. Thalvik closed the channel. He stood in silence on his bridge, surrounded by his confused officers. Having just won a battle that felt nothing like victory, something was very wrong with humanity, and he was starting to suspect he'd made a terrible mistake. The occupation of Epsilon 7 was, in Thalvek's experience, the strangest military operation in Trinity history. The colony didn't resist. The population didn't flee. Instead, they filed formal complaints about the disruption to their work schedules and made the Trinity soldiers sign receipt forms for every building they occupied. Ground commanders Areth reported from the surface. Supreme War Master, the humans are cooperating, but they keep asking about our insurance coverage. Insurance coverage? Thalvek was past the point of surprise. For damages to colonial infrastructure during the occupation, apparently there are regulations. They've given me a very thick binder to review. Thalvik closed his eyes. Just secure the colony, Commander. Yes, sir. Although the colony administrator wants to know if we'll be maintaining the water treatment schedule. They have a rotation system, and if we don't keep it running, the agricultural domes will fail. Fine. Yes. Maintain whatever schedules they want. This was not conquest. This was bureaucratic nightmare. But what truly disturbed Thalvek came 3 days later. When strategic analyst Merkith requested an urgent private meeting, "I've been reviewing human shipping data," she said, her voice tense. "Supreme War Master, something is very wrong. Beyond the obvious?" Merkith pulled up a star map. "We've been tracking human merchant traffic for months, looking for military supply movements. And we found them, but not where we expected." The map showed human space, with colored lines indicating shipping routes. Most followed expected patterns: trade lanes between colonies, supply runs to frontier worlds. But one area showed an enormous concentration of traffic, all flowing in one direction. "What am I looking at?" Thalvek asked. "The quarantine zone." Merkith zoomed in on a region at the edge of human space, far from Crinithy territory. Humans don't talk about it much in public channels, but it's referenced constantly in their military communications. And look at the fleet concentration. New data overlaid the map. Thalvek's neck's ridges went rigid with shock. 90% of human military forces were positioned in or around the quarantine zone, not scattered across their territory defending colonies, not positioned to counter the Crinithy threat. 90% in one place, focused on something else entirely. How many ships? Thalvek's voice was barely a whisper. "Preliminary estimates suggest at least 3,000 capital ships. Dreadnoughts, carriers, battleships. And that's just what we can detect. There are likely more we can't see. 3,000 ships." The Crinithy had brought 500 and considered it the greatest armada in their history. The humans had 6 times that number and weren't even using them against the Crinithy invasion. "What are they fighting?" Thalvek asked. "Unknown. Information about the quarantine zone is heavily classified. But I did find something." Merkith pulled up a series of intercepted communications. "These are fragments from human military traffic. Listen." A human voice, tense but controlled. "Cascade breach detected in Sector 447. Initiating containment protocol Delta 7. All ships converge on breach point." Another voice, void manifestation reaching critical mass. "We need the heavy hitters here now, or we're going to lose the entire sector." A third, pattern corruption spreading faster than projected. Recommend evacuation of colonies in adjacent systems as precautionary measure. The voices continued, reporting on things Thalvek didn't understand. Breaches, manifestations, corruptions. Each spoken with the casual efficiency of people who dealt with such things regularly. "What are these threats?" Thalvek demanded. "I don't know," Merkith admitted. "I've searched our databases, consulted with xenobiologists, reviewed every known form of stellar phenomenon. Nothing matches these descriptions. Could it be a code? Some kind of military exercise? 4 years? Continuously? Supreme War Master, these communications date back decades. Whatever they're fighting in the quarantine zone, they've been fighting it for a very long time." Thalvek sat down, his legs suddenly weak. "We invaded them while they were fighting something else. Something big enough to occupy 90% of their military." "Yes, sir. And they didn't even bother to redeploy forces to counter us." "No, sir, because we're not important enough to worry about." Merkith said nothing. She didn't need to. Thalvik stared at the map showing the massive human fleet positioned at the quarantine zone. An entire armada, larger than anything the Trinity could field, fighting some unknown enemy. While treating the Trinity invasion as a minor administrative inconvenience, find out more. Thalvek ordered, "I need to know what they're fighting. I need to understand what kind of threat requires that level of force. I'll do my best, Supreme War Master. But there's something else you should see." Murkith pulled up sensor logs from 2 hours ago. "One of our picket ships near the quarantine zone detected something. A human vessel emerging from hyperspace. The sensor data showed a ship, a big one, at least twice the size of Thalvek's flagship. But what drew his attention was the damage. The hull was scored with what looked like claw marks. Entire sections were simply missing, and something had punched holes clean through the armor in multiple places." "What did that?" Thalvek asked. "Unknown. But watch what happens next. The damaged ship, which should have been seeking immediate dock for repairs, instead adjusted course and headed back toward the quarantine zone. A communication had been intercepted. This is Dreadnought Indomitable, reporting successful containment of Sector 447 breach. Casualty rate 40%. Requesting resupply and reinforcements, then returning to station. We can't let them through. 40% casualties." The ship had lost almost half its crew and was heading back into whatever had torn it apart. "They don't stop," Murkith said quietly. "Ships come out damaged like this all the time. They resupply, grab reinforcements, and go right back. Sometimes they don't come out at all." Thalvek felt cold. "How many ships have they lost?" "In the past year alone, at least 200 that we can confirm." 200 ships, Thalvek repeated. The Trinity hadn't lost 200 ships in their entire military history, and they keep fighting. "Yes, sir." The pattern emerged over the next week. Murkith compiled a report that fundamentally changed Thalvek's understanding of humanity. It started with the obvious, the quarantine zone and the massive military presence there. But as she dug deeper into intercepted communications and publicly available human data, a picture emerged that was far more disturbing. "They don't talk about it," Murkith explained during her presentation to Thalvek's senior staff. "In their public communications, their entertainment media, even their news broadcasts, the quarantine zone is barely mentioned. When it is, it's treated casually, just another part of life." She played a clip from a human news program. A cheerful presenter smiled at the camera. "The Colonial Defense Force has announced that quarantine zone rotation schedules will be extended by 2 months due to increased activity. CDF officials remind families that counseling services remain available for returning personnel." In other news, the Mars Agriculture Festival begins next week with Murkith paused the clip. "Extended rotation, increased activity, counseling services." They mention these things like they're talking about overtime at a factory. "Perhaps they're simply accustomed to it," suggested one of the tactical officers. "Exactly," Murkith said. "They're accustomed to fighting existential threats. Look at this." She pulled up a series of incident reports, pieced together from various sources. 15 years ago, something called the Cascade event at the Prometheus colony. Entire planet's population of 150,000 had to be evacuated, not because of war or natural disaster, But because of something the reports only refer to as irreversible pattern contamination. What does that mean? Thalvek asked. I don't know. The details are classified. But here's what I do know. The humans quarantined the planet, set up permanent monitoring stations, and established a 50-light-year exclusion zone round it. They shoot down any ship that gets too close. No questions asked, no exceptions. She pulled up another report. 8 years ago, the Void Swarm incident. A species or phenomenon the reports aren't clear that consumed 3 mining colonies before human forces stopped it. Total human casualties, 70,000. Military casualties, 12,000. The engagement lasted 6 months, and we never heard about this? One officer asked. They didn't tell anyone. Why would they? By the time the battle ended, the threat was eliminated. They handled it, buried their dead, and moved on. Report after report followed, each one detailing some incident, some threat, some horror that humanity had faced and defeated. None of them were in the general galactic databases. None had been reported to other species. The humans simply dealt with their problems quietly and efficiently. Here's the pattern, Murkith said. Every colony in human space is designed to be defensible. Every civilian ship has military-grade shields. Every settlement maintains emergency protocols for what they call incursion events. They've built their entire civilization assuming that terrible things will attack them regularly. Because terrible things do attack them, Thalvek said slowly, yes, and they've gotten very, very good at handling it. She pulled up the final piece of her presentation, a comparison chart. On one side, Krinithi military doctrine and capabilities. On the other, human equivalence. In direct comparison, our technology is roughly equal, maybe even slightly superior in some areas. Our ships are more elegant, our weapons more refined. But look at this. The chart shifted to show operational tempo. How quickly forces could be mobilized, how often they engaged in combat, how they handled losses and recovered. The humans operated at a pace that would have destroyed the Krinithi military. Through exhaustion alone, ships rotated through the quarantine zone in 3-month deployments. Combat was expected, planned for, routine. Losses were built into the operational calculus. The entire military machine was designed to keep fighting indefinitely against opponents. That never stopped. We can't match this, one of the admirals said quietly. Even if we dedicated our entire fleet, our entire economy, to warfare, we couldn't sustain operations at this level. No, Thalvek agreed. We couldn't, Supreme War Master, Murkith said carefully. There's one more thing. I found a reference in an old human military journal, written by an admiral who'd served in the quarantine zone for 20 years. He was writing about why humans don't seek help from other species. She displayed the text. We learned early that the things we face in the dark don't follow the normal rules. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They don't care about diplomacy or honor or any of the things that make galactic civilization possible. If we let them through, if we fail even once, the consequences would reach far beyond human space. So we handle it ourselves. We stand in the dark so others can live in the light. It's not noble. It's not fair. It's just necessary. The room was silent. "They're protecting the galaxy," one officer finally said. "And we just declared war on them for it." Thalvek stood, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "Recall all forces. Immediately. We're withdrawing from Epsilon 7. Sir." His tactical officer looked shocked. "We haven't even begun formal occupation. The Council doesn't understand what we're facing. They think we're fighting a conventional war with a conventional enemy." Thalvek looked at the star map, at the massive human fleet holding the line at the quarantine zone. "We're not. We're distracting defenders who are holding back something far worse than us." The encounter of Trinity withdrawal from Epsilon 7 began the next day. Thalvek personally oversaw the operation, making sure his forces left the colony as intact as possible. The humans accepted the withdrawal with the same bureaucratic efficiency they'd shown during the invasion, presenting Thalvek with itemized damage reports and requests for formal apologies. Ground Commanders Areth returned to the flagship with a confused expression. "Supreme War Master, the colony administrator thanked us for not breaking too many things. She also asked if we'd like to leave a formal review of their colony's customer service." "What did you tell her?" "I said I'd pass along the suggestion." "What else could I say?" The fleet assembled information, preparing to jump back to Trinity space. Thalvek stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, reviewing the withdrawal protocols. When his sensor officer called out, "Supreme War Master," detecting multiple hyperspace emergence signatures, analyzing. "They're human ships. Big ones." Thalvek's heart sank. Had they changed their minds? Were they finally going to take the Trinity invasion seriously? "Battle stations. All ships prepare to, sir." "They're not heading toward us. They're passing by." On the tactical display, Thalvek watched as a human fleet emerged from hyperspace. 6 dreadnoughts, each one larger than his flagship, escorted by at least 20 cruisers and twice that many smaller vessels. The fleet was arranged in a formation that spoke of combat experience. Ships positioned to support each other, weapons clearly hot and ready. But they weren't slowing down. They weren't changing course to engage the Trinity fleet. They were simply passing through the system on their way somewhere else. "Hail them," Thalvek ordered. A response came almost immediately. A human face appeared on the screen, a woman with 3 scars across her left cheek and eyes. That had seen too much combat. Her uniform bore the insignia of a fleet admiral. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force, Trinity vessels. Be advised you're currently in a designated military transit corridor. Please maintain current position until our fleet clears the area, Admiral." Thalvek began carefully. "We are withdrawing from human space." "We mean you no harm." Noted. "Appreciate the heads up." She glanced at something off-screen. "You're the invasion fleet, right? The ones who hit Epsilon 7. "Yes, we are. Withdrawing. The war is over." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "Okay, well, thanks for keeping it short. We've got enough on our plate without adding another war to the list. May I ask where you're headed?" Thalvek found himself asking, even though he already knew. "Quarantine zone. We've got a cascade breach that's gone critical. Need to get the heavy guns there before it spreads." She paused, seeming to consider something. You folks should probably stay clear of the galactic rim for the next few months. Things are going to get messy out there. What are you fighting, Admiral? Admiral Chen looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but Thalvik saw something in her eyes: exhaustion, determination, and something else. Something that might have been pity. Things you're lucky you don't have to know about. She said finally, "Stay safe, War Master. Keep your people away from the dark places. Not everywhere in the galaxy is meant to be explored." The transmission ended. The human fleet continued on its course, passing within weapons range of the Krinithi Armada without even slowing down. They had bigger concerns than a defeated invasion force. As the last human dreadnought passed, Thalvik noticed something that made his blood run cold. The ship's hull was scored with fresh damage, recently repaired but still visible. And some of those scars looked wrong, like they'd been made by something that shouldn't exist. "Supreme War Master," his sensor officer said quietly, "I'm reading unusual energy signatures from those human ships. Their weapons are charged with something I can't identify. Show me." The sensor data appeared on his screen. The human ship's weapon systems were operating on principles that Krinithi science couldn't explain. Energy patterns that violated several laws of physics. Munitions that seemed to exist partially in another dimension. "They've developed weapons for enemies we can't even imagine," Murkith said, standing beside him on the bridge. "How long have they been doing this?" "Long enough to get very good at it," Thalvik replied. They watched the human fleet disappear into hyperspace, heading toward the quarantine zone and whatever horrors waited there. The withdrawal and Thalvik's return to the Krinithi homeworld was markedly different from his departure. He'd left as a conquering hero, leading the greatest armada in recent history. He returned in defeat, having lost 3 patrol ships' worth of enemies and gained a cosmic perspective that terrified him. The High Council was not pleased. "You withdrew after one engagement?" Council member Thyral demanded. "One minor colony? This is unacceptable." "I withdrew," Thalvik said calmly, "because we were fighting the wrong war against the wrong enemy at the wrong time." He presented Murkith's findings. The intelligence data about the quarantine zone, the intercepted communications about cascade breaches and void manifestations, the evidence of humanity's long war against things the Krinithi had never encountered. The Council watched in growing silence. "This could be propaganda," Thyral suggested weakly, "designed to frighten us into withdrawal." "I've verified the data personally," Murkith said. "The human fleet concentrations are real. The combat damage we observed is real. The incidents they've dealt with are documented across multiple independent sources." Thalvik stepped forward. "Honored Council, I propose we not only end this war, but actively seek alliance with humanity." Alliance. Several council members spoke at once. "After they humiliated us?" "They didn't humiliate us," Thalvik said. "They barely noticed us. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the scale of threats they face." He pulled up the image of the damaged dreadnought, the one that had suffered 40% casualties, and turned around to go right back to the fight. "This is what they're facing every day, 4 years, and they're winning. Barely, perhaps, but they're holding the line. Against what?" Another council member asked. I don't know, but I know that if whatever they're fighting ever breaks through, if the humans fail, Thalvek paused, we would be next, and we wouldn't last a week. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, the High Counselor spoke. What do you propose? War Master, formal apology, reparations for damages, and a request for information sharing. We need to know what's out there, what humanity has been shielding us from, and if they refuse,